All right, that might have been a little bit sloppy, but this is In the Hall of the Mountain King by Edvard Grieg. The request actually came through the soundtrack to the movie The Social Network, and I kind of wanted to present the vibe at the beginning that kind of felt like the vibe from the actual soundtrack of the movie. I got a little bit creative with our little... That's not actually in the song, but anyway, this is a ton of fun. This, just a little tidbit on this, is actually from a play called Peer Gynt. And In the Hall of the Mountain King is actually something called incidental music. So this is actually music to a straight play. So it's not like there was any singing, but it's just background music. So it's actually kind of interesting that it was taken and put into a movie soundtrack, which has been done many, many times with this piece. It's very, very famous. But the original purpose of it was to be incidental music, which film music is actually the same thing. It's just rarely ever called that because we call it a film score. But technically, it's something called incidental music. So it's something in the background to be playing while you're watching what you're watching. So fun little factoid about that. All right, let's get after the music theory. So this is in B minor, which is where it begins. And we have this little... That's actually walking up the first 5 notes of a B minor scale. Then we have this little chromatic motion. Then what's interesting is that from there, when we go here, that is a broken D major, and you end up going to the root. And the connection between B and D is that D major is the relative major of B minor, meaning they share the same key signature. So the ending of that, when we get to... So it's just going back and forth between the relative chords. Then the next part... In a way, it kind of modulates, but it's the same kind of pattern, but it goes to an F sharp. And the significance of that is F sharp is the 5 or the dominant of B. But it gets a little bit more interesting than that because, just so we know what we're talking about, so B is 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we have our F sharp. But when we get to the F sharp position, we play this. And this note and this note are significant because what it actually means is we've modulated. So we're not actually just playing off of the dominant chord. We're actually going to what is essentially would be the dominant scale version of the parallel major. So the parallel major would be B major. So these notes right here don't exist in B minor, but they exist in B major. So when we go to the dominant, it's kind of like we're utilizing the notes that it would be in its major counterpart. And the chord progression there, that's an F sharp major, but then we go to this. And this is kind of playing off of what was happening earlier in that we have this D note on the bottom. So in the first half, we're going between B and D. Now we're going F sharp and D. However, when we get to the D, it's not a D major. It's something called a D augmented. So we end up with this distance, which basically takes what would normally be the 5th and raises it a half step. So we end up with this chord. So it's a D augmented. So the second progression is F sharp major to D augmented and back. And that repeats several times. And then, I don't know if you caught it earlier when I was playing up really high, I ended up doing this. That only happens like one time in the whole thing, but that actually changes it from going from that D augmented to actually a D sharp major instead. So it gives it a little bit more of a happy vibe rather than something dissonant versus that, or... Yeah. Then we have this little outro where it's this walk down bass line. And in that walk down, essentially what we have is we have a G major. And even though I'm stepping down to F sharp, it's functioning as an inverted D major. Inverted means that the root note of the chord is not on the bottom. It's a different note of the chord. In this case, it's the 3rd. And then we stay here because we end up doing a broken F sharp major. which is the dominant of B, so it likes to resolve. And in between all that, we have these strikes that ends up going up to this chord here. And the way it's being played is this is a B fully diminished 7 chord. So it's just something to add a lot of dissonance. And then finally at the end, rather than going up to the diminished 7, at the end, it ends on a B minor. But yeah, that's a little breakdown of In the Hall of the Mountain King by Edvard Grieg. Yes. Okay, this is Starlight by Muse. What a fun song. Yes. Okay, so this is kind of broken up into 2 different keys. The beginning is in B major, and what that really means is that we have 5 sharps. And it also means that B is our tonic. So the whole intro that goes like this, that goes from a B major to C sharp minor to G sharp minor to E. Then we have this little pre-chorus that things start to get a little bit interesting because the pre-chorus starts on a C sharp minor and it goes to F sharp major. Then it's going to go to an E flat major to G sharp minor. Now that E flat major is not in the key of B major. This, in fact, I shouldn't even be calling it E flat major. I should be calling it D sharp major because of the function. It's a secondary dominant, meaning it is the 5 of another chord in the key. And D sharp major is the dominant of G sharp minor, which is where it resolves. Then it'll go from there it goes to A, to E, then A, back to that D sharp major. And the significance of that is that's our transition into the chorus. And that D sharp major is being used as a chord that's being used to modulate. So we're changing keys, and we're actually changing to what's called a relative minor. So it's a minor key that shares the same key signature as B major, and that happens to be G sharp minor. So we're using that D sharp major because it's the dominant chord of G sharp minor as our transition to this. And that chord progression is going to be G sharp minor to D sharp major to E major to B. What's interesting is that the progression ends on a B major, which is the relative major, but we don't hear it as the home chord because we've modulated to G sharp. We really hear this G sharp as where everything is leading back to. Now, the way we get out of the chorus is on the fourth progression rather than ending on a B major. So remember, we have that G sharp minor to D sharp major to E. And getting out of the chorus, rather than going back to B major, we go to F sharp 7. And it just turns out that F sharp 7 is the dominant chord of B. So both transitions or modulations are using the dominant chord of the corresponding key to transition. So going into the chorus, we use the dominant chord of the relative minor, and getting out of the chorus, we use the dominant chord of the relative major. This is actually pretty basic music theory stuff, but it works really effectively to modulate, and it just turned it into such a killer song. I had a great time putting a piano arrangement together for this. But yeah, this is Starlight by Muse.